Man notices his dog stare at sewer all day. Hears kids scream from inside once. Carl's grandfather had built the cafe he owned in the early 1980s from the ground up. It was then passed down to Carl's father and then to Carl. Over the years, Carl not only kept the eatery going but also the tradition of greeting customers with a furry friend. So every morning when Carl arrived at the cafe, he tied his pet dog Jack to a chair near the front door where the doggo was showered with pats, kisses, and cuddles from the customers. Not to mention it was a business strategy that drew more customers to the cafe. Who doesn't love a furry companion when they're out shopping with their favorite baked goodies and coffee? That particular noon was no different. Carl tied Jack to a chair, flipped the sign on the cafe's entrance to open, and tied the apron around his waist. As customers arrived, they greeted Jack by patting him on the head and shaking his paws, but Jack was staring at the sewer grate instead of interacting with the visitors. "You alright, Jack?" Carl called out to the dog while packing freshly baked bread for a customer. For the first time, Jack didn't respond to Carl and continued to stare. "Hey boy, what's wrong?" Carl asked the dog as the customer left, but before he would get an answer, more customers arrived and Carl got busy. For the next 2 days, Carl noticed Jack always stopped by the sewer gate near the cafe and peered through it. He dismissed it as something unimportant until the next day. Carl tugged on Jack's leash, but the dog refused to move. He continued clawing at the sewer grate as if something was inside it. "Boy, we're running late for work," Jack said. "I'll leave you here if you don't want to come with me." Despite Carl's warning, Jack refused to budge. "Fine, just stay right here." Carl gave up and walked away, tossing Jack's leash to the ground. But the dog pursued him and began pulling him to the sewer. "Leave me alone, Jack," Carl muttered as he yanked his shirt from the dog's grip. It was then that a loud voice distracted Carl. "Help, please!" Wait a minute, what was that? "Help!" A different voice echoed around Carl this time, and it was then he realized where the noise was coming from. He dashed up to the sewer and pressed his ear to the grate. "Is someone in there? My name's Carl, and please let me know if you need help," he shouted. In response, Carl heard 2 screams in unison begging for help, and it was clear they belonged to 2 children. What frightened him was the fading frequency of the children's voices as if they were about to collapse at any moment. Carl panicked. "Guys, hang in there, all right? I'm calling someone for help," he yelled through the sewer grate as he pulled out his phone with trembling hands. "But please help us," shouted one of the voices one last time as everything fell silent. Carl quickly dialed 911, and minutes afterwards, firefighters in safety suits were entering the sewer. Imagine Carl's shock when the firefighters rescued not 1 but 2 unconscious boys bathed in putrid water, algae, and sewage garbage. The children were then transported to the hospital by paramedics, and days later, Carl would find out about their horrifying life. "We've discovered signs of harmful gases in their lungs and they're in a coma. We need to wait until they regain consciousness," the doctors told him. Carl didn't know what to do. He waited at the hospital with the children since he didn't know whom to contact. The children had nothing on them. No phone, no money, and nothing to indicate who they were. How did they get into such a dangerous sewer? From that day on, Carl visited the children daily after work, leaving Jack with a neighbor. One fine day, the 2 children regained consciousness, and thankfully, Carl was at the hospital. He wanted to call the cops, but first he wanted to meet the kids. "How'd you guys even get inside the sewer?" he asked the 2 boys lying on adjacent beds in the hospital. They said their names were Tim and Harry, and they were brothers, with Tim being younger. "We were stuck inside while saving a kitty," Tim admitted. "Thank you for helping us." "Did you find the cat too?" Harry asked sharply, looking at Carl. Then he rolled his eyes and looked away. "It's alright if you didn't. I'll just find her on my own." "Well, guys," Carl said, "I didn't find the kitty or anyone else besides you 2, and you need to give me your parents' phone number so I can call them, okay?" "You don't need to do that," Harry told Carl. "We can go home by ourselves. Dad's always busy and Mom's not with us." "Busy? Hey, buddy, listen to me. No parent's so busy they don't care about their kids, okay? If they are, they're not parents." Tim's eyes welled up with tears. "The hospital would want money from you, Carl," he added. "Dad won't pay the money and he'll leave us here, or he'll disappear so he doesn't have to pay. We don't have any money." "Shut up, Tim. We don't need a stranger's help," Harry said. "We don't need your help, Carl." "Whoa, guys, you don't need to worry about that, all right? I'll take care of the bills. We're going home tomorrow. I'll take you guys home, all right?" "We don't need your help," Harry snarled. Harry dialed his father, David, several times, but all the calls went unanswered. So the next day, Carl drove the boys home. However, Carl would have never imagined what awaited him. When he arrived at the boys' home, he was surprised to see the terrible conditions they'd been living in. Their house was so old and depressing, and it seemed as though no one had lived there in a long time. The table was covered in dirty dishes and the garbage can was overflowing. There was no food in the refrigerator and stale pizza boxes were strewn around the front couch. "Harry, you need to tell me what's going on, okay? Look, all I want to do is help you." When Carl consoled Harry and told him he genuinely wanted to help him, the small child began describing how awful their life had been since they lost their mother to cancer. Harry confessed that their mother had died due to lack of proper treatment. After their mom's death, their dad David changed completely. He didn't care about them and he didn't work. He'd disappear for days and return home at odd hours in the morning. The boys were scared of him and would never tell him anything, even if they needed something. Harry and Tim didn't even go to school. After their mother died, their father stopped paying for their education. Harry knew that if someone told the cops that they'd been living, social services would place them in foster care and they'd get separated. That was something he didn't want since he didn't want to lose Tim. So to protect his younger brother, Harry was hesitant to tell anyone about how they lived. Shortly before Carl found them, they were running after a kitten they'd adopted after finding her abandoned on the street. Unfortunately, the sewer wasn't covered and they were trapped after descending into the Save the Kitty. Carl was shocked that 2 young children, both under the age of 10, were living such a horrible life. He had to do something to help them. So the first thing he did was clean their house. He took out the trash, cleaned the kitchen and living room, and ordered pizza and drinks for the 2 boys. He didn't open his cafe that day knowing he'd lose money, but nothing was more important to him than helping these young boys. After finishing the cleaning, Carl and the boys were having dinner together when they heard the front door open. They all jumped to their feet when they noticed David. He was home and furious at Carl. Tim and Harry were scared and hid behind Carl. Carl was taken aback as David slumped his shoulders and began sobbing like a child. "I'm exhausted and I deserve hell. I'm not even a good father. I was a terrible husband and a terrible man. I've lost my previous job and I've not been able to find a new one." He then began explaining how tormented he'd been since losing his wife, and Carl felt awful for the man. Because David was reeling from his wife's loss, he couldn't bring himself to go out and work. He sometimes drank to forget his problems, but it only made him worse. He couldn't love his children as much as he used to, and he despised himself for being a lousy father. "Why didn't you ask anyone for help?" Carl asked. "What'd they think about me? I'm a man and can't ask for help." Reaching out to someone doesn't imply you're weak. It's a sign you believe you're strong enough to express your thoughts and ask for help. We all need a shoulder to cry on in tough times. "Hey, how about I help you?" "But why?" David asked in tears. "You're just a stranger." Carl smiled. "Cheer up, man. There are no strangers in the world. We all need each other. The boys need you. You need to pull yourself together for their sake." And Carl followed through on his promise. He'd helped David reclaim the dignified life he'd lost by assisting him in getting a stable job and introducing him to a therapist friend. After several months, David returned to Carl with Tim and Harry and the kitten they'd lost. While Jack couldn't stop racing after the kitten, David thanked Carl for turning his life and his boys' lives around.